Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdullah Sahal, and I'm from Group 7. In Group 7, there are Norika Aspriyanti and Yenis Qoriatul Fauzi, and finally Abdullah Sahal. And this is my name. Here I will explain the definition of Quasi Experimental Research. The first definition: Quasi Experimental Research. Small and Quasi Experimental Research design examine whether there is a causal relationship between independent and dependent variable. Simply defined, the independent variable is the variable of influence, and the dependent variable is the variable that is influenced. In other words, the independent variable is expected to bring about some variation or change in the dependent variable. Example, in a study examining the impact of oral corrective feedback on grammatical development, corrective feedback will serve as the independent variable and grammatical development as the dependent variable. Quasi-experimental design is an experimental research design carried out under conditions that do not allow controlling or manipulating all relevant variables.
Quasi experimental design is an experimental research design carried under conditions that do not allow controlling or manipulating all relevant variables. And quasi-experimental research aims to obtain information that is an approximation to information that can be obtained by actual experimentation under unfavorable conditions, allowed to control or manipulate all variables relevant. The characteristic of each experiment has a fairly visible difference. The characteristic of the quasi-experimental research method include have multiple methods in the implementation or testing of objects. The method used will be compared with each other, and selection of the control group and the treatment group was not done randomly. As for in detail, the weakness of quasi-experimental research are as follows. The first, the absence of randomization, which means grouping sample members in the experimental group and the control group did not done randomly. And the second, control of the variables that affect the experiment not carried because these experiments are usually carried in the community. In addition to having a quasi-experimental weakness, it also has profit. The advantage is that in this quasi-experimental research does not have strict limit on randomization and at the same time can control validity traits.
And the next is about the types of quasi-experimental design. There are 4 types of quasi-experimental design. The first is time series design, the second is non-equivalent control group design, the third is pretest post-test design, and the fourth is regression discontinuity analysis. I will explain the first type of quasi-experimental design. This is time series design. A time series design is an example of longitudinal design in which researchers collect samples of language on a regular basis over a set period. A time series design is characterized by multiple observations put before and after the treatment. The essence of the time series design is the presence of a periodic measurements process on some group or individual and the introduction of an experimental change into this time series of measurements. The results of which are indicated by a discontinuity in the measurements recorded in the time series. It can be diagrammed on the picture in this slide. This experimental design typified much of the classical 19th century experimentation in the physical sciences and in biology. And the next is about non-equivalent control group design. One of the most widespread experimental designs in educational research involves an experimental group and a control group both given a pretest and a post-test, but in which the control group and the experimental group do not have pre-experimental sampling equivalence. The assignment of X to one group or the other is assumed to be random and under the experimenter's control. The non-equivalent control group design can be diagrammed like the picture in this slide. This design is almost the same as the pretest post-test control group design, but in this design, the experimental group and the control group are not chosen randomly. The next is about pretest post-test design. The pretest post-test control group design is probably the most common experimental research design. In this design, the experimental group takes part in some type of treatment or intervention marked by X, which can consist of single or multiple training sessions. The design also includes a pretest and a post-test, in which both of experimental and control groups participate. The pretest post-test design can be diagrammed like the picture in this slide. And the last is about regression discontinuity analysis. This is a design developed in a situation in which ex-post facto designs were previously being used, while very limited in range of possible applications. Its presentation here seems justified by the fact that those limited settings are mainly educational. It also seems justifiable as an illustration of the desirability of exploring in each specific situation all of the implications of a causal hypothesis, seeking novel outcroppings where the hypothesis might be exposed to test. Okay, that's all from us. If we make a mistake, give us apology. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.